Good evening and welcome. I'm Andrea Mulrine with the League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County, and I'd like to welcome you here this evening for a debate with the candidates for the 113th Legislative District. So with us this evening we have David Burgerhoff. He is a candidate on the Republican ticket, and Representative Marty Flynn. He is the incumbent in this particular office, and he will be running on the Democratic ticket this fall. So welcome, gentlemen. We appreciate the fact that both of you are here with us this evening. I'd like to share a little bit with you about the League of Women Voters, and also extend my thanks to our co-sponsors this evening. First, ECTV and Mark Migliore, who, if we did not have him, we would never get this on ECTV or on our website. So Mark, thanks for being here with us this evening. And also the University of Scranton and the Political Science Department. With us this evening is Dr. Jean Harris from the Poli-Sci Department here, and we are always so appreciative of the University of Scranton and their generosity and allowing us the use of their facilities at no charge. So we thank them for allowing us to be here this evening as well. The League is a nonpartisan political organization. We are an organization of members, and we neither support nor oppose any candidate for public office, but we do take positions on particular issues. So some of the questions that we ask are derived from what League policies might be and how the League stands on an issue, but we do try to cover most of the things that are important to all of us as voters in this particular election. This will be approximately a 60-minute debate. All candidates will answer the same set of questions, and no questions were given to them in advance. Each question will have a 2-minute response time limit, and each candidate can give up to 5 rebuttals of 1 minute each. They can use more than 1 minute of allotment at one time if they so desire, but no more than 5 minutes over the course of the debate. Candidates are each allowed a 2-minute closing statement, but there are no opening statements. The questions were all written by League of Women Voters members, and we try to do research on all of these as well. So I will try to start each question with a little bit of setup for the audience and also for you so that you know what we're asking and why we're asking that. I'd like to start, though, with giving you a little bit of information about the candidates. First, we have David Burgerhoff, who is a Scrantonian. He has received his Bachelor's of Communication from the University of Scranton. He has served as a minority inspector in the elections. Thank you for doing that. And he has also been a city council candidate. He spent over 10 years in management as a supervisor and has worked in sales as well. And he has one son, David Matthew Burgerhoff, who's a senior at Myers High School. So welcome. Thank you. With us also this evening is, as I said, incumbent Representative Marty Flynn. Marty has been in the State House since 2013, and he serves on the Commerce, Consumer Affairs, Game and Fisheries, Gaming Oversight, and Insurance committees. He's single. He graduated from Marywood University with a Bachelor of Science in Legal Studies, and is also a Scrantonian. And prior to serving as our state representative, he was a former Lackawanna County prison inmate, and he had also served inmate education program coordinator. Okay, we're starting off really well tonight. My apologies, Representative Flynn. I ended at the end of that sentence.
I guess that's payback.
Whoa. He was a former Lackawanna County Prison Inmate Education Program Coordinator and chairman of the Prison I didn't even realize I said it, so, and chairman of the Prison Misconduct Board. So, oh, wow. All right. So having started that with tonight's joke unintentionally, I will ask the first question, and we drew straws. Mr. Burgerhoff will give the first response. So let's talk about government first, and let's talk about one of my favorite topics, and that's government redistricting. And I could talk for an hour on government redistricting, but I'll control myself tonight. Statewide organizations, including the League of Women Voters and Common Cause Pennsylvania, have formed Fair Districts Pennsylvania, a statewide effort for redistricting reform. Pennsylvania is home to some of the most gerrymandered districts in the United States, and unfairly drawn districts disenfranchise voters and make it more difficult for legislators to effectively represent all of their constituents. So here's my question for you, gentlemen. Do you support legislation to remove control of the redistricting process from all individuals who have direct conflicts of interest in the outcome, including legislators, legislative staff, political party officials, and to establish an independent independent Citizens Redistricting Commission with authority over both legislative and congressional redistricting? And please explain your answer. You have 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I received something recently in the mail regarding this exact issue, and it was a pledge they wanted us to make if we are against redistricting or if we want a more fair and balanced redistricting system, and I signed it. I truly agree that the districts are pathetically drawn. If you look at the 113th district, it covers parts of Scranton, most of Scranton, South Abington Township, and Clark's Green. There's certainly enough residents in Scranton alone that it should be its own single district, in my opinion, and that's just one example. I know there's a lot of good legislation, or at least ideas out there in order to correct this issue, and I think we should move forward on it. I don't think you need a long answer in this one. I think it's a flat out, yes, we need to stop gerrymandering and come up with a system that's more fair.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn.
Yes, Andrea, I definitely support redistricting. I actually sponsored a bill last session based on the Iowa plan that objectively redistricts the various districts in the state of Pennsylvania. I had bipartisan support for the bill. They never ran the bill in committee, and part of the reason there's no temperature for that currently in the state House and state Senate is, as you know, the redistricting committee is bipartisan, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and the 5th person on the redistricting committee is appointed basically by the Supreme Court justices and whoever has the majority. And historically the majority has been Republican. Now it has switched to Democrat, so things will probably change a little bit more, but I think it should be more objective in terms of who's going to represent who. You know, they're like Mr. Burgerhoff said, they're scattered and drawn. Our county was actually carved up and a seat was moved away to the Poconos. You know, Ed Stayback's seat years ago was moved away to the Poconos, and Representative Haggerty and Representative Farina had to go head to head, and we ended up losing a seat. So I definitely support this, and we'll support this in the future, and we'll sign a pledge.
Okay, thank you. If you would move your microphone closer so we can hear you better, I'd appreciate it. So, Mr. Flynn, the next question goes to you first. And this one, we're going to stay with government and talk about legislative reform, okay? Pennsylvania's size of legislature reduction amendment may appear on the November 6, 2018 ballot, so next year, in Pennsylvania as a legislatively referred constitutional amendment. This measure would reduce the size of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives from 203 members to 151 members, but the size of the Senate would stay the same. The proposal was approved in the Pennsylvania legislature in 2015 and 2016, so in both the House and in the Senate over the course of 2015 and 2016. This is a constitutional amendment which requires that it pass in the House and Senate twice, so it would have to, in this upcoming year, pass twice, once in the House and once in the Senate, and then it would come to the voters as a ballot question to actually to vote up or down on the constitutional amendment. The House Appropriations Committee has estimated that the amendment, this reduction in the number of legislators that we have, would save the Commonwealth $10 million to $15 million per year. Here's my question for you. Would you push to have this come to a vote and then vote in favor of this bill?
Andrea, I already voted in favor of this bill in the last session, so if the bill comes up again, I will vote for it. I already have, so. Yes.
Okay. Mr. Burgerhoff.
To me, this is something that still needs to be debated and discussed. The way I look at it is if your state representative is very effective, the more you have, the better. I'm not saying that we need to expand the size of the legislature, but I am saying that it may want to remain the same size. $10 to $15 million sounds like a lot of money, and I'm not going to try to pretend here that it isn't. But it's a $31.5 billion budget. It's a very small part of the legislature. And one of the things I'm running on mostly is that I want to be a local representative, that the state issues are very important to me, obviously, because the state issues affect us locally and statewide. But the local issues here, the blight and the other issues that remain in our city, and all the lack of representation and lack of leadership that we've seen here, I see a real strong need for good representatives. So, I mean, I don't want to reduce them if we have good legislators. So my concern is that we may actually eliminate some of the help that we would have if we had people doing the job that I believe they should be doing.
Okay, thank you. The next question, Mr. Burgerhoff, will go to you first. Let's talk about voting reform. Again, something near and dear to the hearts of League of Women Voters members. Ensuring that all voters have access to the ballot box is one of the essential functions of government. Yet Pennsylvania voters have some of the most restricted access to the ballot in the nation. Pennsylvania is one of only 9 states without any of the following reforms: early voting, optional vote by mail, pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds, or same-day registration. So if elected, will you sponsor legislation to support increasing access to the ballot through these reforms? And please explain your answer.
Anytime we can get more people to vote and give them more opportunities to vote, obviously I'm in favor of it. I also am in favor of voter ID, which I think goes hand in hand with, if we're concerned about getting voters to the polls, let's make sure they are our voters. So, I mean, the integrity of the vote is what's most important, and the more people we get out to vote, the more influence that our people have. We have low turnout rates continually, and I guess some of that can be attributed to the system that we have here in Pennsylvania. I'm not sure nationally. I would have to see the numbers if it's benefited or made a major difference, but again, I would obviously support legislation that opens up an opportunity for our voters to be registered. I just want to make sure that any step we take is well thought out and it's debated, because at the end of the day, we need to discuss each one of these topics and not act like it's just a simple yes or no. There's a lot of little fine details that go into these type of legislations and these type of ideas, and same-day voting sounds wonderful, but as somebody who worked as a minority inspector, I don't want to say that I observed voter fraud, but I have observed attempts that would be considered possible voter fraud, and I really think the integrity of vote is, this election, this national election is showing how concerned people are about the integrity of the voting right now. We have a large population that isn't necessarily documented, and we want to make sure that if we're going to have a system that's a democracy and have laws that are established by the people elected by that vote, we want to make sure that the system is proper.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Flynn, the question goes to you. If elected, will you sponsor legislation to support increasing access to the ballot through these kinds of reforms?
Yes, Andrea, and I find it interesting that my Republican colleague here feels that way, because there's 1.2 million more Democrats than Republicans in the state of Pennsylvania, and Republicans have taken every possible angle they possibly can to keep and suppress the vote in Pennsylvania and suppress Democrats from getting to the ballot box. They do not want early voting. They do not want to see it. You'll never see a bill like that come up out of state government ever, because they don't want Pennsylvanians turning out, because the majority of Pennsylvanians are Democrats. It's very simple. I will support any measure to access for voters to get to the booths, because we need all Pennsylvanians to vote, not just some of them, and especially early voting or online voting is another one that I believe in.
Okay.
May I have an opportunity to rebut that?
Yes.
I am running as a Republican, and the numbers don't matter to me in the state, because I would represent both parties. To think that a Democrat wouldn't want to vote for me means they don't want to vote for good ideas, and that's what I represent. If you want to turn around your cities, if you want to turn around your local neighborhoods, I'm the guy for the job. So I'm not concerned. If Republicans are concerned by the numbers, then we need to change those numbers. That's a failing on the Republican Party, not a failing in the state. And I'm an independent thinking Republican, and I believe many of our voters are independent thinkers. They may be registered with one party or the other, but I would never pigeonhole them to think that they can only ever pull the straight lever and vote one way or the other. I give them a lot more credit than that, and I think Marty should as well.
Mr. Flynn, any rebuttal?
No.
Okay. Let's move on then, and we're going to talk about pension reform. And Mr. Flynn, you'll respond first. Pennsylvania taxpayers' unfunded pension liability has more than doubled from less than $30 billion to $63 billion. While the legislative debate over reform continues, Pennsylvania taxpayers and state workers are sinking deeper into the pension crisis. A recent Moody's report on state pension liabilities concludes states with large gaps, like Pennsylvania, will be forced to direct more money toward their pension systems just to keep unfunded liabilities from growing. Which, why is that important to us? It means fewer dollars for schools, roads, and other basic services. What plan or legislation do you support to address this issue?
It's a very complex issue, Andrea. First off, I would like to say that we have $60 billion in unfunded liability currently. You know, back in 2000, our pension system was 125% funded. And the political people at that time started to use the money in other places, fill their potholes, and not make their payment. And when the market crashed, the dot-com bubble burst, this is what happened. Everything dropped, the housing market dropped, pension spike, boom. We lost billions of dollars, and we're left with a bill we have to pay. It's like having a mortgage. We have $60 billion right now of unfunded liability, okay? To the average person, you might think quickly, well, why don't we just get people out of the pension and put them in hybrid plans or put them in a 401k? But the problem remains, you still have $60 billion in unfunded liability. So when you start to divert the money away from the $60 billion you have owed, you end up costing that fund more money. So one of the things I believe in is right now money is cheaper than ever, okay? Bonds. Float a bond to help pay down some of that debt, okay? Purchase the bond, get it paid down, get our Moody's to upgrade our credit rating, which has been tanked. It went down 4 times under the Corbett years. So that's one thing. And also, we have private people in Wall Street that are getting management fees for managing the funds. $900 million a year in management fees. I think that should be cut down and taken a look at, but I'll support any legislation that will help the current funding. We have to get the unfunded liability down. Something that doesn't work towards the unfunded liability, I'm not interested in doing, because we have to get the unfunded liability down. Or it's just gonna spike.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Burgerhoff, the question to you, what plan or legislation do you support to address this issue?
Well, I'm not going to look through my notes to find the House bill that was passed not too long ago, but if I'm not mistaken, we did sort of address this issue in a way that we're contributing, I believe, $500 million more a year to the underfunded pension system. We talk about defined benefits as opposed to defined contribution, which I'm sure most people have seen that in the papers. You have a rough idea what it means. We were guaranteeing what we were going to give the individuals in our retirement system, and when the system tanked, as Marty had pointed out, there was some serious issues meeting the numbers that we had promised. Going forward, we can't make those promises, but we are contracted for the promises we had made to the people who are in the system currently. I believe that new legislation also addressed this issue by bringing on new hires are going to be put into a different type of system. So, I agree with anybody new coming in, we have to address this issue going forward. They talk about a 401 style type of investment plan. I like the idea of floating bonds to our citizens in order to fund our debt. I don't really have a problem with that. I think if anybody's going to benefit from the interest we pay on loans, it should go to our citizens, and I think it's a worthy investment for a lot of us because there's not many investment opportunities out there for us, really. The only thing I question, and I read this somewhere, because I've been reading a lot of things, so I don't want to say maybe I've convoluted this, but I believe unfunded liability is a little different than debt. As an unfunded liability, there's no interest on it. It's sort of a debt that sits out there, but there's no interest. If you borrow money to pay unfunded debt, unfunded liabilities, you're actually increasing your interest rates on loans for something that doesn't truly have an interest. So you got to watch how you pay the unfunded liabilities, coming up with obviously changing the system with the new hires coming in and looking for other revenue sources. And by that, let's not kid ourselves. The only revenue source any state or government seems to have is the people and the taxpayer. It's just where you pay that additional tax and how they come up with it. Maybe remove it from property tax or some other way. That's always a game, but it's just a shell game. The fact of the matter is these are contractual obligations and we must meet them.
Okay, thank you. So
My rebuttal to that was, no bill has been passed that does anything for the current unfunded liability. It's all future revenue. It's all 15, 20 years down the road. Nothing to help the current balance on $60 billion has been passed. And that I don't support. Especially when you divert money away from that revenue stream, that money we owe with new hires, it does nothing for it. It actually costs it more money in interest, some studies say. So I just don't want the public being fooled into thinking putting everyone else in a 401k is going to work. It's not going to work.
Okay, thank you.
May I? Maybe I did misread that. I could have swore I read there was some legislation passed and we are contributing $500 million towards the pension deficit. If we're not, then that is a plan and a way we're going to have to move towards. But again, if a big portion of this is contractual debt, contracts, you cannot break them. You must honor your debts. That's one of the reasons we're in these problems with Moody and the rest of these agencies, because we're not necessarily on the ball and paying our debts properly. So,
okay, thank you. Let's move on. We're going to talk now about the environment for a few questions. My first question pertains to the landfill. Do you support or oppose the Keystone landfill expansion? And do you feel that existing state laws are sufficient to protect public health, water, air, and land? And Mr. Burgerhoff, you go first.
Well, I'm somebody who uses our environment a lot, and I use our river a lot. I kayak, I hike, I fish. So there are concerns with me. I know a lot of people have expressed dissatisfaction with the size of the landfill. It looks like a mountain over there. I get it, what they call it, Mount Trashmore. I like that. You know, at the end of the day, a lot of people are employed by that facility, and that facility still does have a use. I say we look at it on 5-year plans. If they want to extend the contract, we can just extend it for 5 years, and in the next 5 years, they can try to go back and revisit the legislation on this. I don't think you go 50 years out, because a lot of us would be suspicious why you need to go that far. So I think that's one thing we really need to look into. As far as the voters and where they stand on that issue, I listen to a lot of talk radio, and I listen to people who are very involved politically. So I've got their feel on it. You know, there's a bunch of websites dedicated to it, and all those people obviously oppose the landfill expansion. That doesn't mean that's representative of the population, and I would need to further explore that. But I myself think the best way you do it is start out with a small 5-year plan. You have minimal incremental type of additions to the landfill. I doubt you have to go much higher if you continue with the 5-year plan. If they have to keep going higher, people don't want that. We're not going to be able to, and they're going to have to phase that industry out of this area, because it's just not going to be feasible.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Flynn, same question to you.
I support the current legislation, the current status quo with the DEP. You know, I was asked my personal opinion on the landfill, and I said I support the expansion as long as it doesn't go any higher than it already is, and people have to look at it. And, you know, there's 150 people that are employed there. My residents in Scranton pay $300 a year per unit, per home, for their garbage. If that closes, what I hear triple, 4 times the amount my citizens are going to have to pay, my constituents. But also at the same time, we have a safety feature. As long as it's up to par with safety and DEP, I have no problem with the landfill. But, you know, leachate lines, untreated leachate, treated leachate, you know, as long as it's safely done and in the guidelines of the DEP, I support it.
Okay, thank you.
I hate to use all my rebuttals, because I'm sure I'm going to regret this later, but, you know, is this the same DEP who can't explain what that stink was that went through the city of Scranton and hasn't provided us with the source of that DEP? You know, so there are more concerns around that landfill than just, you know, the size of it. So that's something, I don't know if I necessarily have that much confidence in the DEP. Actually, I read a lot of articles where most people don't. Much of it's political, like a lot of our appointments. A lot of these people don't even have the experience, and sometimes you wonder where their loyalties lie. So I just wanted to make that clear, that I don't necessarily trust the DEP in this situation, and I think the people have a right to be heard.
Mr. Flynn, you wanted to rebut also?
DEP stated that it wasn't the landfill. So.
Okay. Staying with the topic of the environment. While Flint, Michigan had national attention for high lead levels in their drinking water, a 2014 study by the Pennsylvania Department of Health shows that 18 cities in Pennsylvania, including Scranton, have higher lead exposure, boy, I can't talk tonight, than Flint. While this comes from lead-based paint versus water, which was in the Flint case, what action have or would you propose to address this type of issue? Mr. Flynn, you go first.
I would definitely support something, since we have Consumer Affairs Committee that our utility companies, all their legislation goes through. I would definitely support legislation to make it a certain threshold that the water has to carry a certain quality for the constituents of Pennsylvania statewide. I know there was a problem with the water source out in I think it was Greene or Washington County out in western Pennsylvania. They actually couldn't get their hands on quality drinking water. I think that's a basic right for Pennsylvanians, and I think it's something that any legislator should support, and I will support that.
Thank you. Mr. Burgerhoff, the question to you.
Well, I can't disagree with clean water. The only thing is I paid a lot of attention to that Flint issue when it was going on. I actually sat there and watched hearings because it was somewhat interesting, because I kept thinking about this area and all the lead. But I, too, agree that the majority of lead in this area is actually in our homes, in the walls, and the paints. I gut homes all the time. You want to talk about stuff that's in our home poisoning our children. Start in your own house. Maybe you don't want to worry about the water yet. That's a secondary issue, to be honest with you. they talk about the age of our schools. Look at the age of our homes. There's a lot of things in our homes that you just really don't want to know about. Take a look at your air systems that heat your home. See all the stuff in there: asbestos, dust, lead-based paint, lead shavings. This goes on and on. So obviously, water is a very important issue as well. We need water to live. And it's funny because a lot of times Republicans get attacked like we don't care about the environment. We breathe in the same air and drink the same water. So any legislation, obviously, that would address that issue is wonderful. Ironically enough, up in Flint, a lot of the mistakes and a lot of the problems that occurred were due to lax regulation, to people allowing other individuals to skirt the legislation. There's actually was suggestions of many criminal charges against a lot of the people, and I think there may have even been some charges brought. So getting back to the landfill and DEP issue and any type of legislature or regulation, we need a lot of times, we need volunteers on these advisory boards. We need people who have the time and the knowledge to go out and assist these individuals. So we take the politics out of it and actually bring people who are only accountable to the neighbors and their friends.
Thank you. Let's stay on the topic of the environment and talk about oil and gas now. So, Mr. Burgerhoff, you'll answer this question first. New regulations protecting the environment and public health from both unconventional or fracking and conventional or shallow oil and gas operations received final approval in April. However, Senate Bill 279 was amended in a House committee to block the conventional oil and gas regulations from going into effect despite years of developing the new laws with strong public input. Do you support or oppose greater regulation of oil and gas operations? Why or why not?
Well, if they're making mistakes and they're polluting our water or our environment, obviously there needs to be more stringent regulations placed on them. I mean, I'm all for open markets and allowing people to conduct business in a proper manner, but if they're not, obviously we do need to step in. There are incidences where we can prove that they've had well failures. There's been plenty of well failures in this area and surrounding areas, so I'm not going to deny mistakes happen. We've all seen oil spills on television. So it's a real issue. I mean, it's not to be ignored. It's also a very large industry bringing in a lot of money into this area, bringing a lot of money into Pennsylvania, and although it's slowed down, it still accounts for a decent part of bringing in a couple millions, if not actually billions of dollars, even without, where we have these discussions based on what type of fee are we going to charge them, extraction fees, impact fees, and even that gets a little convoluted when we start talking about the percentages and the mathematics behind it, because we tend to ignore wages paid, taxes paid on wages by our corporations, corporate tax by these corporations that are actually operating within the state. We'll compare them to Texas, and actually a lot of the frackers in Texas get a exemption from that 7% or 8% rate or whatever it is. It's higher in Texas. They end up paying usually right around 3 or 4%. I like the fact that the impact fees go to the local municipalities, and they are better off spending that money locally than sending it down to Harrisburg and trying to get that money back.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Flynn, the same question to you. Do you support or oppose greater regulation of oil and gas operations? Why or why not?
I support certain regulations for safety interests. I definitely think we have one of the largest resources of natural gas in the world that can literally lead us to energy independence from oil in the Middle East. Some of the numbers I've heard and the quantity of natural gas that we have in our own backyard here is astronomical. But, we're currently at war with OPEC over this, and, the price is literally dive bombed. So I don't necessarily think we should tax the industry out of business, but I do believe in a fair severance tax, once things get going more in the positive in the industry. And I think more safety is definitely needed, and I would support more safety regulations for the drilling industry to protect our water and natural resources, especially on state game lands.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move to economic development, but still I want to talk about gas for just a minute. So, State House Bill 1391 proposes a guaranteed minimum gas royalty payment. This proposal is in response to complaints raised by property owners who have found their gas royalties reduced because they're charged for processes and transportation costs that many assumed were the responsibilities of the gas drilling companies. In some cases, people have even received a negative royalty statement suggesting that they owe money to the company. What is your position with regard to the royalty concerns raised by Pennsylvania landowners? And Mr. Flynn, you'll respond first.
On 1391, we actually have one bad actor company. I believe it was Southwest Energy that's really the problem over this. not giving the royalty owners, the owners of the land, their proper money, and adding on costs. The bigger companies, the Cabot's, they don't mind paying the leasee. It's the bad actor lesser, Southwest Energy, that was really the problem here. I actually don't support that bill because I don't think it's fair. I support the lessers in the sense that I think the lessees should have to prove that the lesser didn't properly hold up their contract. Okay? I definitely think that all lessees should receive their proper royalties, and I would support anything that supported that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Burgerhoff, the question to you.
This might sound a little rough, but I think it kind of is in line with what Marty just said. I'm going to say buyer beware in a way. You have contracts, you get a lawyer. If you're going to involve yourself in something like this, especially when it comes to your home property, you might want to have a lawyer look over the contract. That's my first suggestion to anybody getting involved in anything, especially with large corporations. Now, should the government help and assist in this and keep people apprised of the situation and the bad acting that is done by certain corporations? Certainly. But there truly is some accountability here on the homeowner to make sure that they're getting the best deal for themselves. There's a T-Mobile lawsuit out there just recently, and I think it had something to do with the amount of data usage, and after a certain amount it dropped, and people hadn't noticed that in the small print it said that usage would drop. Actually, I have a month-by-month payment plan myself, and in very small print I had noticed that it's really not unlimited. It's unlimited at high speed to a certain degree, and then it drops. I read that. I took the time to research that contract, so I don't want to act like people are that savvy and that they can necessarily read through contracts like I'm going to do because I enjoy this type of thing. But what I am going to do is always encourage people to get a lawyer. We do in any instance in our life when we make a big home purchase, when you make a car purchase, you have someone there, a notary, to make sure that it's legal. There's always some sort of legal type of conglomeration or cooperation that happens here. There had to be people involved when they were doing this, although I did deal with individuals who got involved in a large lease, and it was a speculation lease, and they were given a certain amount of money for a whole year while they held their land and wouldn't sell to anybody else. And the whole time as I read the contract, they said, this is not a good deal, you need to get out. The problem was they were already involved in it, and they had listened to a lawyer. So my point is not listen to any lawyer. Get yourself your own lawyer and deal with these contracts accordingly. Legislation that protects the homeowner is always important. That is the role of government, to make sure that businesses operate in a fair and balanced manner. But we do have to, at some point, really accept our own responsibilities.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Burgerhoff, you'll answer this next question first. So staying with the theme of economic development and its impact on our people, let's talk about the minimum wage. All of Pennsylvania's neighboring states have raised the minimum wage over past years, but our minimum wage remains at $7.25. According to KeystoneResearch.org, more than 24,000 people in Lackawanna County, or about 24% of the workforce, labor for a minimum wage that has an inflation-adjusted value, making it roughly 18% lower in real dollars than it was in 1979. What is your position on increasing the state's minimum wage?
Again, I'm a free business guy, and as somebody who solicits labor, I love the arguments, 10, 15 bucks an hour. When I tell people I want 10 or 15 bucks an hour, they usually send me packing. So it sounds good in theory, but to actually get people to pay you that, you have to provide the service. They think it's worth it. Things get very expensive when you pay low-income, low-skilled laborers to prepare a burger for you, $15 an hour. That may sound harsh, but that trickles on down to the process of manufacturing that meat product, so the price does go up. And I know there's studies both ways, and it's hard to really determine at the end of the day whose plan is the best, because it's amazing how we can both get facts from both sides and they both work out, when we both know, somebody who has been involved in a lot of businesses understands it's supply and demand. If you can't afford to pay those employees the $15 an hour, if it costs you your business, or if you have to lay people off, then therefore there's no gain. The other thing I'm concerned with is, let's say we did this $15 an hour, and I've never heard this discussed, but let's say we did the $15 an hour and it stayed in effect for 2 years, and it turned out to be an abysmal failure, and we ended up laying off a large amount of people. Well, now they've contributed to the unemployment system very little, but they've contributed at a base rate where their wages were very high. And therefore, the payout at the unemployment side is going to be very expensive and going to cost Pennsylvania a lot of money. It's something that I'm not sure a lot of people are discussing or considering. Now, if the unemployment doesn't go up, great, and we all make a lot of money, we all spend a lot of money, it sounds wonderful. But how does the government know how to tell you what you need to pay your employees? You pay your employees based on the amount of money you earn and what you can afford to pay them. Most small businessmen, and there's a lot of them, a couple 100,000 in this state, small businesses, a lot of them only employ themselves or a couple other people. You want to talk about raising your minimum wage, you're going to have to work more than 40 hours a week. Does that sound harsh? Talk to any business owner, they'll tell you they work 60 to 80 hours a week. It's difficult, but that's part of getting through. That's how you raise your wages. Bringing in better skilled jobs, getting an education, a college degree has proven time and again to pay more money when someone has a college degree. The discrepancy between college graduates versus non-college graduates is undeniable. And therefore, we need to push our education system, which I know will be a topic that we do get to. So there are small fixes that the government can create environments where we can actually thrive and small business can do well, but a minimum wage isn't the way to address it.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn, the question to you, what's your position on increasing the state's minimum wage?
First of all, I think we should definitely increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. It's impossible for a person to live on $7.25 an hour and work a 40-hour work week and survive in this state without government assistance. Not possible. Okay? Any Pennsylvanian that makes under $50,000 spends roughly of 80% of their income, disposable income, gone, spent. If every Pennsylvanian was making at least $15 an hour, you're talking about increased spending, would stimulate the economy, jobs, everything. I think it would mirror Seattle and Pennsylvania. And more people would have money and more people would spend money. It would drive the wages of everything else up. The wage of the average CEO has gone up 300%, but they don't cry about that cost. You know, the average worker deserves a raise. It hasn't moved with inflation since 1974, I believe. It's the last time it actually moved with inflation, the wage. $7.25 an hour. You cannot raise a family, let alone raise yourself on $7.25 an hour without government assistance. We give companies government assistance. We should give people the right wage.
Thank you.
May I?
Okay.
A large amount of employers in Pennsylvania and nationwide are small business employers. They're not big CEOs making millions of dollars. Let's not make that mistake. So we may be targeting the wrong people at times when we talk about this high wage. They're not the ones necessarily going to be paying this $15 an hour because this is going to be across the board. You may actually cost a lot of people their business, and then you won't realize these supposed taxes that we're going to be gaining. Another thing, if you really want to address the income issue, then I say you address it on the tax level. You know, maybe we should exempt people under $25,000 from having to pay a state or local tax. There's a direct impact that we can do pretty quickly. It may take a legislative act from what I've been looking at, but otherwise that's one way we should look at this.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Flynn, this next question will go to you first. Let's talk about corporate taxes. So the so-called Delaware loophole allows corporations making profits in Pennsylvania to get away with not paying Pennsylvania state corporate taxes. Are you willing to place on your agenda the elimination of the Delaware loophole?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Our corporate tax rate is actually 9.9%. And that scares a lot of companies away from Pennsylvania, but they still come most of the time. I believe it's only like 30% of businesses actually pay the 9.9%. Everyone else uses the Delaware loophole or other tax shelters. I definitely would support that. I actually sponsored legislation to lower from 9.9% to 6.9%, I believe, and then to 5% the corporate tax rate alone, with nothing with the, and it still didn't move anywhere. They like that Delaware loophole. I definitely would support any legislation to close the Delaware loophole. Supposedly last session we did close the Delaware loophole, but the reality is we didn't.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Burgerhoff, the question to you. Would you be willing to do something to eliminate the Delaware loophole?
Certainly. I do agree that this is a bipartisan issue and it's an important one. I was reading something by the Policy Institute, and they mentioned combined reporting, which basically they want to tax the profits of people on the percentage of sales that they do here in Pennsylvania. Because what happens is people take their profits and they say they lost money in Pennsylvania, but they made money obviously in the states where they don't have to pay a higher tax rate, thus the Delaware loophole. So it seems very common sense to address that and deal with that. As far as lowering the corporate tax rate, that was also suggested. If you close the Delaware loophole, that you can lower the corporate tax rate and possibly realize more business coming to this area based on that. Obviously, these people would be more willing to report their earnings in the state if they're going to be taxed at a lower income.
I just wanted to say too, that Governor Wolf actually supported the combined reporting that he's speaking of in his last budget proposal last session, and it wasn't used, and it actually closed the Delaware loophole, and there was no support for it on the other side.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move off of that topic for now and move on to a subject that is so prevalent in the news, and that's the subject of guns and gun control. The Pennsylvania Instant Check System, according to the Morning Call, is significantly more comprehensive in identifying records of dangerous criminals, domestic abusers covered by protection from abuse orders, and violent juvenile offenders who are prohibited from purchasing firearms than the national instant criminal background check system. Do you support or oppose using the Pennsylvania instant check system rather than the national system? Mr. Burgerhoff, the question goes to you first.
I have to be honest, I'm not completely familiar with it, but if you're saying that it's more likely to prevent people who shouldn't have guns from getting guns, then I'm willing to endorse that. You know, a lot of people will say, you know, the only people who have guns are criminals if you pass laws to keep guns out of people's hands. I don't think that's what we're talking about here. We're just talking about common sense legislation that would obviously vet the background of these individuals and make sure those purchasing these weapons are allowed to have these weapons. So, I mean, I'm in favor of that. There's another thing I had said I was in favor of, and that is they currently apparently don't have to report a lost or stolen gun. To me, I mean, I don't know if this is a Republican thing. I guess they might not like this. People say, as I said, I'm an independent thinking Republican, and any good idea is a good idea to me. I think you should report a lost or stolen gun. You would report a lost or stolen vehicle, and I don't understand why there would be any pushback on that. I also believe that people should secure their weapons when they're not at home. Obviously, when you're home, your gun locked up in a box isn't going to provide you the protection that you need, but you're also there to monitor that weapon when you're not home and your children may be home alone. So I talk about something called gun management, and I basically put that on the homeowner, not necessarily the government. I think the government needs to be doing more gun training in our schools, because I think the small children need to be at least familiar with the weapon, because a lot of us have never seen guns or been around them, and you see a lot of mistakes, a lot of tragedies that probably could have been avoided if kids, first of all, you want to tell them not to touch it in the first place, but that doesn't necessarily work. At least if they properly know how to handle and understand the danger associated with that weapon, we might have less incidences.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn, the question to you.
Yes, I would support something to make it more efficient on a background check, or any common sense gun legislation that would keep guns out of the hands of criminals. But do I believe in stacking databases to compile against the citizens of Pennsylvania? No. I believe in the Second Amendment, and I support the Second Amendment, and am a gun-carrying citizen of Pennsylvania.
Okay. Mr. Flynn, this question is going to go to you first, and it still is on the topic of guns. Currently, Pennsylvania requires background checks for all handgun sales, but only for long guns sold by a dealer. Should private and gun show sales of long guns, like the popular AR-15, be required to have background checks? Why or why not?
Historically, we haven't had that. But with the things that are current in our society, I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing to have a background check to purchase the firearm. So would I support that? I would. Yes, I would support that aspect of it. Okay. Mr.
Burgerhoff, the question to you.
I guess I always worry about precedent. You know, sometimes people talk about the slippery slope, and in debate, you're usually not allowed to use slippery slope, but when it comes to government, obviously it's one of the best arguments, because usually you start down that road, you continue down that road. I know a lot of people who hand off guns to family members. I know a lot of people who've passed on generations worth of guns. It seems if you even want to pass it down to your grandson, you would probably have to go through this background check. We've historically not needed the background check on the long guns, and I would honestly have to hear the debates. I can't honestly say that I've arrived at a decision on this, and you'll find that about me, and I think that's the most refreshing thing about myself. You're not going to know where I'm necessarily going to come down on these, not because I don't have rigid ideology or not because I don't have a basic moral compass, but because I feel we need to listen to the needs of everybody. And so I really think a debate on this still needs to be had. I haven't heard the better parts of the debate. We all get to see the ancillary debate, but I want to see the really good debates and see what the real reasons are behind why we want to make sure these guns have to be registered, why these guns have to be transferred through the system. Handguns, I'm not even sure necessarily with the handgun background check that we've prevented crime. That's my problem with this. I don't know what these laws are actually solving. We see these crimes all the time, and you can't legislate morality. You know, so I always want to be slow when we talk about even messing with our rights in the slightest way. These are rights that exist since the beginning of this country, and actually they existed long before the country even existed. Most of our rights, all of our rights should truly exist with or without government because they're inherent rights. These are rights that we all recognize as self-evident.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Burgerhoff, this next question will go to you first. Let's talk about police protection. Do you feel the local police forces have the tools they need, the training, the money, et cetera, to effectively and safely protect the communities they serve? But more importantly, as a state legislator, if that's not the case, what can you do about it?
Well, this is a flat out, I don't think, I mean, I myself personally have dealt with a lot of the issues of perhaps, I guess it's inadequately staffed police forces, or perhaps their hands are tied, or the inability of the court systems to handle the workload. I'm not sure what the problem is, but I can tell you, in any neighborhood, you go on these blog sites and you watch the crime in these neighborhoods, half of it's not reported. Half the people don't even bother calling the police. The response times have been complained about. This isn't to pick on the police. This is to pick on whatever the system is and why it's failing, that we need to address this issue. As a state legislator, one of my biggest things is I want to get even more involved. I understand we have neighborhood associations and crime watches, and I understand the police are working closely with our neighbors. But we're not seeing the benefits of that. You know, it's funny how people take pictures of a criminal, usually their children, actually, if you watch a lot of the West Side Post, and it's like, who's this kid? Who's this kid? You know, back in the day when I was a kid, if I did something wrong, the neighbor would know who I was. They wouldn't need to put a picture on Facebook. So maybe we need to look at ourselves a little bit, a little introspection. Sure, there's a lot your state representative can do as far as bringing resources, as far as perhaps even passing some legislation. But in all honesty, this falls on the citizens, every single one of us. And if we're going to start pointing fingers, like they say, you point that way, you got three pointing back at you, I'm just as culpable as the rest of us. I've dealt with a lot of kids, and I try to mentor children continually. I'm watching the drug epidemic, the crime epidemic just continue to grow around here. So, I mean, is it needed to be addressed? Of course. Is it a lack of police staffing? Perhaps. These are things that actually need to be addressed, and these are things that, honestly, our neighbors have to start working together in a much more coordinated effort, and we have to get out and meet our neighbors.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn, the question to you.
I would have to say Scranton Police does an unbelievable job. I think in the late 80s when Wilkes-Barre, Hazleton had to cut back their police force, Scranton really sucked it up and kept the numbers over 100, I think like 120. And I think that's why today we have one of the safest, best places to live in Pennsylvania, because we made that sacrifice. And I think our police force does an excellent, excellent job with the manpower that they have, and I'm always there to support anything that they need, or any ask, or any grant they're looking for. I'm always there for them. I think they do a great job with what they do. I don't think they're underfunded or understaffed, and I'm proud of the job they do, and that's why I think we have some of the best numbers in the state of Pennsylvania with our officers' job performance.
Okay, thank you.
May I?
Your last rebuttal.
Fine. This is a good place to use it, I think. I thought his statement kind of said that with the manpower we have, and then he says he thinks it's adequately staffed, so I would think that was a little contradictory. But more important, safest city? Marty has a post, if you go on, well, I just Googled Marty. I was curious to read a little bit about him, why not? And he had said about Scranton that we have that Heritage Trail and people jog it at night. And he said, first of all, I want to let you know that the Heritage Trail closes at dawn, especially spots where there aren't lights. And Marty said, it is not safe to be on that Heritage Trail. You know, that's a real sad admission for a state representative. And then to sit here and tell us that it's one of the safer cities, I think that's just a little disingenuous.
Okay. I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions. So let's talk about transportation a little bit. And this question will go to Mr. Flynn first. Do you believe the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission and PennDOT should be consolidated into one entity? Why or why not?
I would say I have to look at that issue further to decipher that issue, but I would probably say no, because you're talking billions of dollars and putting it into one government agency. I don't see how that can efficiently be done.
Okay. Mr. Burgerhoff, the question goes to you. Do you believe that the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission and PennDOT should be consolidated into one entity?
I'm actually a little disappointed in Marty's answer. I was hoping perhaps he had some, insight on this. Obviously, he's been there 4 years. He should have a little better information regarding this than myself. But most people here would agree that the Turnpike Commission has been basically described as notoriously corrupt, or at least ineffective at best. So I don't know what you do, but you need to revamp the Turnpike Commission. And let's address that for one moment, because we do rely a lot on the money from the Turnpike Commission, the tolls. And as you'll have seen, if you've read any of the, the commentary regarding the increasing tolls continually going up, Turnpike use is dropping, and it's going to continue to drop as we continue to raise those prices. You can't rely on revenue when you continue to deplete the people who are actually paying the bill. So in answer to that question, I'm going to go with Marty and say that I don't have enough information regarding it, but I'll tell you it does need to be addressed, and anything we can do to reduce the size of them and the waste, and anything we can do to speed up these construction projects, get these individuals working overnight hours in a safe manner, and anything we can do to address, we redid the Linden Street Bridge, which, is a nice project, and it collapsed, and we redid it again. I questioned to myself, did we need that as badly as we needed other roads and bridges in the area? If you went through Taylor when that bridge was down, and I know this is getting a little outside the purview, but it addresses the fact, if you went through Taylor, that bridge was down, and they made that little roundabout, and actually they opened up the area to that reclaimed spot, and I thought, wow, they're going to develop this is going to be awesome. But no, they rebuilt the bridge that we didn't need. We got away without using that bridge, and they actually, the way they made around it didn't require a bridge ever being built, and yet we put the bridge back in. So, I think we just need better ideas all along, and we need to get people who actually have experience in this. A lot of appointments, and I think I was reading something very funny about the Liquor Control Board. The people that we put in charge there, they don't have the kind of experience in these businesses, and it's why a lot of times you see failure in government. It's cronyism. It's not putting the right person in charge of the job.
Okay, thank you. I have time for one more question. So let's talk a little bit about education, but in this current climate, when we're talking about a presidential election and everything that's been going on, let's talk specifically about civic literacy. So the state legislature has taken up a bill that would require high school seniors to demonstrate very basic civic literacy to qualify for graduation. One proposal is to derive a civic literacy test from the National United States Naturalization Test. Although 90% of immigrants taking the naturalization test pass, at least 1/3 of citizens who take the test fail. Is civic literacy a legitimate purpose of the state's education system? And if so, would you support a graduation requirement that assesses civic literacy? And the question goes to you, Mr. Burgerhoff.
It's funny because a lot of times when they talk about the testing in our school programs, and they want to tie it to funding, they just want to tie it to results. There's a lot of different things they always want to tie it to, and they always talk about the testing. Is it fair? Is it biased? To me, it seems like a simple solution, but this is what I do. I come up with simple solutions, and perhaps it's a little too simple, but I do say teach to the test then. They say these people teach to the test when they test relevant subjects, test relevant topics. If you test math, if you test literacy, if you test basic common sense social studies, then who cares if they teach to the test? Isn't that what they're supposed to be teaching, the 3 R's like we used to do? Let's not convolute it and make it so difficult. So if you're saying that this test provides for standards that are going to make sure our children are minimally literate enough to perhaps understand maybe an 8th to 10th grade reading level, then I'm totally in support of it. As a requirement for graduation, we graduate way too many kids who are just not necessarily not even capable of reading very well. But if you can't read well, it puts you behind in so many different situations. You can't do the research necessary. You can't even balance a checkbook because you don't want to get into the aspects of looking into what's it take to earn this money or what's it take to gain interest. A lot of people, we want to always try to get our people ahead. Well, it starts with your ability and your enjoyment of reading. If you want to learn how to invest in your future, just on your own personal level, if you want to read a contract with the gas company, as we were speaking to before, at least have minimal understanding, you're going to need to know how to read. So Sure, anything that's going to make sure that our people as they graduate are qualified to be successful, actual citizens and contribute to the society, that's wonderful. As I said, I want to see people graduate with college degrees because it's been proven time and again that when you have a college degree, you make more money. Puts the whole minimum wage thing to bed when we have people who actually do higher skill level jobs and take that, that first job, like my son working at McDonald's currently, that's not his career path. And it's a perfect job for a kid in high school. So when he graduates high school, he's going to know how to read. He's going to go on to college. With or without that test, my son's going to be successful. But we do have to set minimum standards and make sure that we are teaching what we need to be teaching.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn, the question goes to you. Is civic literacy a legitimate purpose for the state's education system? And if so, would you support a graduation requirement that assesses civic literacy?
I don't think the students of Pennsylvania need more tests. I think teachers need to be allowed to teach more, and they should have more hand on their students and on their class. I think another test isn't going to solve anything. I think if you want to take that curriculum and put into a social studies class, they have to pass social studies. They can't get an F to pass. So I don't disagree with the subjects of civics being front and center, to get into the next level, but to make it mandatory, that's legislators trying to do the job of teachers, and I don't agree with that.
Okay, thank you. That unfortunately concludes the time that I have to ask questions of our candidates this evening. So we will allow each candidate 2 minutes for their closing statements. We drew straws, and Mr. Burgerhoff, you go first.
All right, thanks so much for being here tonight and for tolerating me. This is small print, so I apologize if I don't look up enough, but I used the printer at the Fidelity Bank, and it's the best I could do on short notice. The first time I spoke out publicly was at a prison board meeting in the courthouse of Wilkes-Barre. WIOK played my sound bites for 2 weeks. What they didn't play was what I said to then Commissioner Greg Skripnak, who smirked and looked down at myself and others with arrogant contempt. "We're coming for you next," I said, and we did. The next public comments were at a city council meeting here in Scranton. I began with a quote from Mother Teresa, which I'm sure many of you have heard before. 2 members of council were quite condescending towards me. I continued to attend and speak out, and those 2 lost re-election. I quoted Jason Miller in a debate here the last time I ran for city council. I lost, and in my opinion, Scranton was the bigger loser. I may not have been the best person for the job, but I was certainly the better choice in that election. Jason's Miller quote still sums up my perception of the people in this area and what I think of myself. It goes like this: I could not be prouder of my roots. In coming home, I have discovered who you are. You are survival with grace, struggle with dignity, pride with compassion, and hope and laughter. Right now, we suffer from an exhaustion of hope because there's no hope in a future that is certain when it's certain that future is hopeless. We need more than inspiring words. We need action. We need to reduce our debt, reduce our crime, and reduce our drug abuse. We need to rebuild our schools and our neighborhoods and tear down our blight. We need to do more than survive. We need to reaffirm our dignity. We need to muster our pride, remember our compassion and our laughter. We need to define hope. We need to become hope. It can no longer be just a word or a campaign slogan, and I hope you agree. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn, your 2-minute statement.
Andrea, I just wanted to thank you and the League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County for having us on this stage. It's a privilege and an honor. And it's also been a privilege and an honor to serve the people of the 113th District. I've been flattered. My office, my staff is here. They've done a great job helping me serve the constituents of the Democratic Caucus of the state of Pennsylvania. My numbers are off the charts. We're number 1 the last 3 out of 4 months in constituent service for the constituents of Lackawanna County. And it's truly been an honor to work in Harrisburg to fight for funding for education, to try and get things back to our area, certain grants that I've actually acquired to help blighted areas of West Scranton. It truly is an honor, and I'd like to say that I thank David for coming up here and debating me. It's been a privilege, but furthermore, I think I have a lot of work left to do for the people of the 113th District, and I'm honored to serve you, and I'm honored to ask you for your vote on November 8th to keep supporting me and help me move forward and move the 113th District forward. Thank you.
Thank you. How about a round of applause for our candidates? Thank you, gentlemen, for being here with us this evening, for your commitment to democracy. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County, the University of Scranton, and ECTV, thank you for being here with us tonight. We do have another debate scheduled for October 27th for the 114th Legislative District. We will be, there's my timer going off. We'll be up at Clark Summit University for that particular race with, it's the Sid Michaels, Kavulich, and Cheryl, and I never get it right, Murnan Scandell. I got it right. No, Scandell, Murnan, I never get it right. So we will be broadcasting that as well. There is also a ballot question on the November ballot pertaining to the retirement age for judges across the Commonwealth. We hosted a panel discussion here last week that is airing on ECTV and will be available on our website as well. You want to take a look at that. We did not take a position on it. It's the pros and the cons, so you can make your own decision about whether or not you want to vote yes or no for that particular question. Election Day is November 8th. Get out and vote. Thanks again for joining us this evening.